I had to go and carry a friend on the port at 1 o'clock. All right, so we're live now. It's gonna build up in a little bit, and we'll see how it goes from there. A friend on the port at 1 o'clock. So, what events have been going on at CariFesta?
CariFesta? Boy, really?
Yeah.
A case of a lot of material from performances by people from all over the Caribbean, whether it is photography, art. There was a lot of music, of course, obviously. Food, plenty food. You know, all the charities brought drink and set up their stalls and so on. They had a whole area in terms of household goods and so on. So everything from pottery, I mean, you know, clothes, I mean, not clothes in terms of the household, but a lot of original stuff. It was really great. We just had CariFesta is a very difficult festival. Yeah. In that there's so much going on, and the response by the crowd to go to particular events is kind of, people feel a little bad about it and so on, and say, oh, you know, people didn't turn out for this and then turn out for the next thing. But the reality is that, you know, I felt that the people were still recovering from crop over.
Yes.
You know, they would need a little time to catch their hand, especially with money and so on, you know, because even though they charged $10 and the season ticket was $50, I think that I felt they should really have given it. You know, I don't know that, you know, a thing like that is expected to make money. I think there's a greater impact overall, and you know, the people who should make money, the vendors and, you know, those kinds of suppliers and the taxi operators and the bus operators and, you know, the independent people. Yes. After all, you expect them to make a dollar. And the hotels, of course, and guest houses and that kind of thing. So that's really.
When you guys cover it, does media in Barbados cover it and go live with any of the events?
Yes, they set up a whole television channel actually. CBC.
Okay,
Barbados.
that's for CariFesta events.
Yeah, there's a CariFesta channel, and there was a lot. There was a lot of promotion on the radio and television. They had a jingle moving, the personalities talked about the events, etc. But I think I just think that the debate is a little tired from crop over one, and I think that obviously, I mean, you know for yourself in Trinidad and Tobago, there's certain events that would attract a huge crowd, and there are other things that would take, you know, a smaller number of people to come, etc. You know, I know you're disappointed in things, but you know, one group turned up and there were 10 people in the audience, and they decided that they wouldn't perform. It was interesting, a comment from somebody said, "Look, your performers, go on and do your stuff, whether you are one person or 1,000 people, as the case may be."
All right. Well, I'm going to go into it now. Just give me a few minutes to introduce you properly, because we have about 9 viewers here. So, Julian Rogers, as we all know, has served as the CEO of CNMG. Served certainly as the CEO of CNMG for 8 months. Previously, he was a consultant to the board for about 3 months, and he chaired the national consultation on the future of CNMG and GISL, which occurred for 4 nights on national television. He previously served as the Chief Content Officer of CNMG in the period running from 2006 to 2007, overseeing overall programming at a time when the company had committed to funding original programming and was one of the key consultants in the setting up of the company several years ago at the turn of the century. The 3 radio stations and the newsroom for both television and radio. So what used to be TTT became CNMG, and it had 1 television station, 3 radio stations. Julian has extensive experience in Caribbean media management, regionally, and he is also a personality in television and radio. We were very familiar with him here as someone on TV6, and then of course eventually when he went over to CNMG. So Julian, good morning, and thank you so much to agreeing to break your silence.
I like that. I'm a little jealous that I don't have a TTT shirt, but
I will see how quickly I can arrange one to be shipped over to Barbados for you.
I remember when there was a gathering at the theater workshop, and Wendell Manwaran walked in wearing, or appeared on stage wearing an OTTT shirt. Yeah. There's so much nostalgia associated with a brand that is TTT. Rich history as one of the leading television and radio, television and radio outfits that the Caribbean has created over time, and it's had a storied past in particular in recent times, etc. For the brand, that is TTT. You've got a whole generation of people who were raised on TTT. You've got a generation of people who were some of the best talents that ever came out of the Caribbean. People talk about that all the time. You've got all the technical skills, the creative skills, etc. I think that period where there was so much national programming or regional programming, and I really would like to avoid using the word local.
Why are you averse to using the term local content?
Yeah, I don't like the word local because of the connotation that it is attracted over the years, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the Caribbean. People say, "Oh, local." I mean, like the newscast, for instance, and they say, "Oh, the news is we bring you the local, the regional, and then the international." And I've said from time and time again, why do we say local and then regional if our country is not part of the region already? And news does not separate itself in that context anymore. I mean, those are old-fashioned models in terms of news production, news presentation. But that's that beside. But again, I don't like the word local. I'd like to think that we need to look at ourselves as creating content that, if it has the quality, it can be matched with anything anywhere in the world. You don't hear Americans talk about local programs. The Canadians, the British, etc. They don't do it. They don't describe it as such. It is always about original programming that they expect will be sold to the rest of the world. The Nigerians have done it very well. The Indians have done it. All that stuff coming out of India, under the Bollywood banner, for instance. The Nigerians have done. I mean, you've seen a lot of the material that's come out of Africa and so on. And there is material in the Caribbean that is very original. From every territory, there are filmmakers, there are documentary makers, etc. And not just in the Caribbean physically, but Caribbean people in the diaspora. And they all would like to have a consistent showcase within the Caribbean for their material. In the same way, for instance, that the musicians, the soca artists, the calypsonians have been able, and the reggae and dance hall, etc. artists have found a ready platform within our space. And in a number of instances, that music has moved beyond our region, etc. And nobody talks about it being local. They just talk about it being good. And we have so many instances of good original material that is world class. And I think that is where we should begin to think about it, and eschew the sense that because we produce it, that it is not good enough, and therefore it is local.
Right. So then I guess the question I want to go to now is, do you agree with with moving from CNMG and shifting back to TTT?
I would have to say I agree, on the one hand, but I have my own particular reservations about how such a thing is done. We're talking about a brand here. I think that is really the heart of the discussion, and I think that people need to understand what that is about. Now, when I served as the CEO, we had started the process of bringing more original programming to the station, and I think if you turn on the screen right now, you'll see and hear the identification that says Trinidad and Tobago Television at its best. Now, that was a subtle flashback because I think that a lot of people feel very strongly that that TTT brand can withstand a challenge within the marketplace. I think I read today the Express editorial that describes CNMG as a clumsy title, and I agree. I didn't like it at all when it was first presented, but it was really too late for me for my input to make a difference. I had already come into as a consultant at a time when the naming of the company had already been done, and so on and so on and so on. And we've definitely fought over the years to establish the C brand. And in some cases it's worked. I understand that when I was away that the see yourself concept did work, and so on. But I think
what's the see yourself concept?
Yeah.
What's the see yourself concept?
The see yourself concept was really to reach out and show the rest of Trinidad and Tobago to the rest of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, a decentralization of the coverage of development in the country. And that, I think, is really should be at the heart of what any new entity, whether it is a TTT or a PPP or whatever the case may be, that the mandate needs to be adjusted in such a way that it is very, very clear that this is really an attempt to provide the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago with an unrivaled service that is funded by the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, and that really stands in great stark contrast to what the private sector media have been doing. Now, I think you need to understand what has happened in terms of programming over the years in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, in Jamaica, etc. And I'm talking specifically about television. The feeling was over time that the audiences wanted to see the best of the American and the best of the British at one stage, the comedies and sitcoms and whatever else as the case may be. Yes, there was a time for that. But I think we missed the boat in not recognizing that with the entry of cable, that we needed to shift away more to our own original programming. It would have been the time if we'd started, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, to recognize that we needed to begin to fill our programming with our own images. There are a couple of stabs at it, but not consistently so. You know, there was work on creating a serial, what we call a soapbox serial anyhow, on television, and you had successful work from people like Daniel Devantala and so on. There was lesser experience in Jamaica, very little experience of doing that in Barbados, for instance. And outside of that, not even Bahamas and so on even tried it. So we missed the boat because what happened was that we were buying programs from the United States, showing them on our system, and now these programs began to be available via cable. So people who watched cable saw those series in real time, but we were buying the series one series behind. All right, was good for those people who may have missed or didn't have cable, and so they would get a chance to see. But look at what has happened. You now have serious cable penetration in the markets up and down the Caribbean. You have tremendous competing cable systems. They are bringing you all those shows that we went out and spent millions of dollars to buy. So there really is no need for us to continue to import those kinds of things. I think if we have to import anything, we should be very selective in the stuff that we bring into to our audiences to be able to make it very distinctive. And that is where I think the thinking should go and the work should go in terms of creating a brand new product for the audience in the Republic.
Julian, I want to interrupt you here and ask this. Just a couple of minutes back, you talked about original programming taking place. You made reference to Daniel Diffentala and I guess Earth TV. What made it difficult for us to be consistently producing original programming here? Because we have a station, we have equipment, we have studios. Why was it so difficult?
You need to make a decision that you are going to make this investment. That is really the problem here. I remember when I was at TV6 that Ken Gordon begged Bernard Panton, who was head of television at the time, would you just take some of our money and create some original programming? And Bernard's resistance was, look, we would lose in the survey because the programming would have to go into prime time and it wouldn't be able to stand up against what TTT was putting out at the same time as the case may be. And I remember those conversations. I remember those appeals again and again. Ken Gordon had this idea of getting a program that captured the three W's of West Indies cricket, Weeks, Worrell, and Walker. And he said so at the time, I'm talking about 1990s now. He said so at the time when only two of those W's were still alive. Worrell, of course, had died a long time ago, but then there was Walker and Weeks in Barbados, both sirs, both knighted, etc. And I mean, as chairman and CEO, he said, look, go. I mean, get hold of the BBC who got archive footage and so on. Go to Barbados and film the interviews with Mr. Walker, with Walker and Weeks, etc. Now, you need that kind of drive from the very top. Ken Gordon issuing a mandate, dictate, as the case may be, was very, very powerful. But you need that across the board. You need people to say, look, if we're going to do, if we're going to push and encourage original content, this is what our investment is going to be. Now, we did that at the beginning of CNMG back in 2005, 2006. Yeah. We did have an original program budget for producers to work on projects, to be commissioned to work on projects, for instance. And I remember that there were many submissions. Daniel Diffentala was on the staff. There's another lady, Sergio, I think. I'm trying to remember her name now. She was on staff, etc. And there were many submissions. But there was a very striking resistance by one person on there who said who used the term that people were coming to feed at the trough. And I was grossly offended. And I said so. I think I must have used some good Bajan words for about 20 minutes, etc., to tell this person that I was, I was offended on behalf of the independent producers. Now, that really is at heart. I'm saying if you have the will to do this, and if the minister's statement is to be accepted, I think he has to accept that the government needs to make a commitment and an investment. And I don't think, and I don't agree with him to say that doing the local program is going to be cheaper. It will be cheaper over time, but the initial investment required now to really make a boost and so on with this thing will require some funds. And if they're serious, they've got to find the money to do this properly. Otherwise,
what do you think?
It will be a disaster.
What do you think? How much investment do you think would be needed at this point in time?
I don't want to put a dollar value on it right now, because I don't want to. I want to be fair to the people who have to make these decisions. But I can tell you that when, and I want to give some particular credit here to a group of people. Now, when I served as consultant to CNMG, which would have been what, January to March of 2016, I started the process of talking to the independent producers. I spoke to people like Mario Brown, I spoke to of course, Daniel DeFantala, etc. And eventually, when I became CEO, acting as CEO, I asked them to come together and let us see if we could forge a partnership between the independent producers and CNMG. And they did fantastic work. Dion, Marielle, etc. They got together and we sat down and I said, look, here's the situation. CNMG does not have $1 million to buy a Marielle Brown program. So let's understand that. We don't have a lot of money to invest in programs produced by this guy who's been producing Calypso Rose, for instance. I said, but what we need to forge in terms of a partnership here is that CNMG makes an initial investment to license your program, one. Two, that we establish a profit-sharing facility. And also that CNMG finds a way in which to raise funds for onward commissioning a program. So the initial investment for CNMG in terms of an annual budget for a program schedule, I think came in at about 1.3 million to start with. All right. We had a schedule that I'm telling you was about more than 90% original programming. There is a lot of content sitting down in Trinidad and Tobago. And we hadn't even, I think there are a few instances of a few programs outside of Trinidad that were available. So I'm saying that one, you have the initial licensing. One, the other peg of that is that because CNMG would have made an investment in this partnership, we could also have acted as, or could act as agents for those programs in other markets across the Caribbean. So Barbados would be interested, Jamaica, Antigua, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, etc. There are a lot of television stations around. And I might add that you now have the pay-per-view opportunities that are available on, say, a DigiPlay and Flow and so on. And even CNMG could create a pay-per-view facility and so on. So the potential is there. One, the model is handled correctly. Producers would have a starting point with the existing material. One, two, they would also then benefit from CNMG's ability to commission original programming. So that will keep them going, etc., and sustain them over time. And as we get better, and then who knows? Those programs could be sold, etc., and make a lot of money for everybody.
But Julian, go ahead, continue. Sorry.
I'm only saying that. That's why I say I hesitate to say what that investment would be. But I will add that the advertising community would have a stake in this, because if you're building audience, they would want to advertise. You could also make a direct appeal to particular companies that don't advertise a product, but they operate very successfully in Trinidad and Tobago. What about the oil companies? Can you not make an appeal to them and say, look, we are creating a fund for original program production of Trinidad and Tobago talent. Would you put in $1 million or commit $1 million to such a fund? So you now open the door for a contribution from people who recognize a corporate responsibility in this context, because the sanity of the country, for instance, depends on a number of factors that are key aspects of media operation. We want to keep the country happy. We want to keep the country informed. We want to keep the country operating as a developing society, etc. These are contributions that they can make in terms of the content that is produced, because not all the content is entertainment. Not all the content is funny shows and whatever else. There are a lot of other things that need to be done by a radio or television outfit in the interest of national development. Look, who pays for all the specialized coverage that a station like CNMG is expected to deliver? Mr. Manning died, for instance. That required a mobilization of a ton of people and resources, not all owned and directed by CNMG. All the coverage of the budget, if there's a national emergency, it's got to be that. That is not something that TV6 or CNC3 is going to get up and do. They're not expected to do it, and they won't do it because it's not making money for them. But CNMG has a responsibility. I see somebody complaining the other day that CNMG didn't cover the athletic championships and so on in London.
No,
well,
they didn't.
The reality is it costs money to do that. You got to pay for rights, and rights these days are extremely expensive. So therefore,
but other media houses, hold on, other media houses were able to do it, and they did it using the YouTube feed that the federation had put up.
Right. Okay.
So what would be the expectation?
All right. That may be one instance in which rights were not a formidable cost, but there are many other instances where you've got to pay for rights, and the rights are extremely high. And I know, for instance, with the Olympics, the last Olympics in Rio, the rights to that really came down to a situation where he eventually recognized, the rights holders recognized that the stations up and down the Caribbean could no longer afford to pay for rights, and therefore we got rights in the back end of the sponsorship deals that they worked out, etc., across the board. But we're lucky in that context. But I come back to the point of recognizing that there are times, there are events in the country, across the Caribbean, for instance, that will need to be covered consistently, immediately. And you need this kind of facility, and it needs to be funded.
Okay, but you started making a point earlier on, or you certainly touched on the whole business of political interference within a media house. Now, Minister Cuffy on Friday indicated that his government, and this is something that Dr. Rowley had said often on the campaign trail, and I think maybe even during the consultation period, that he doesn't believe that a government ought to be involved in that way. So one, do you think the state has a role to play in media? And two, is it possible to have a media house run by or owned by, certainly funded by the state, and there not be political interference?
Yes, it is possible for the government to own it, but not control it. And that is at the heart of this of the debate. And I'll say one thing. When I served as the CEO of CNMG, I never received a call from Dr. Rowley, Minister Cuffy. My newsroom head never received such calls either. Now I know in a former dispensation that was not the way it was. I think that I say that to make the point that the editorial independence of a media house, whether it is government or state or privately owned, etc., is very important to the credibility that the audience attaches to that outfit. Now, I know that over the years, and I'm not just talking about Trinidad and Tobago, but I'm talking about up and down this Caribbean, including my native Barbados, where the politicians have been directly interfering and directing, either directly or through their agents, the output of television and radio stations. And I know that you're fully aware of the activities that have taken place in recent times in Trinidad and Tobago with the previous administration, etc. I was struck, let me tell you, I was struck when I came back to CNMG in what that would have been what, November 2015.
Yeah. And
I got invited back to host the consultations on the future of CNMG and JSL. And the chairman at the time, Helen Drayton, said to me, "Have you been to the station as yet?" And I said to her, "No, I came in last night. I went to the hotel, and I've come down to the office this morning." As you know, as many people would know, the CNMG corporate office is on another street away from the studios and operational facility on Maraval Road. So I hadn't gone over there. And Helen Drayton said to me, boy, you will be surprised when you go over there. It is nothing like when you left. The people are demoralized in the newsroom, and their reputations have been damaged and whatever else the case may be. And when I did go over, I discovered such. And when I became CEO, long before I became CEO anyhow, I tried to encourage the people in the newsroom to take a fresh stance and to try to work at rebuilding their credibility. And I'm happy to hear that people have recognized the change. And that has been possible because there's not been anybody, I certainly have not gone into the newsroom to say you should do this and you should do that, as the case may be, other than as a training person, as a journalist, and try to encourage people to build their skills and be better presenters and better journalists, as the case may be. So if you can separate, and you come back to the original question now, state ownership does not have to mean state control. Nobody needs to be dictating other than the management of the operation.
How do we prevent state ownership from becoming state control?
All right. We need to have a buffer, a clear buffer between the political directorate and the policy people, and of course the management. Now, I know what you're going to say. This is the Caribbean, and it is impossible for us to do this kind of thing. And I read the editorial this morning in the Express, where they said, look, it is clear that the minister does not feel that the government would relinquish the control of CNMG now, or TTT, whatever entity it is. I think he needs to step back, particularly as a former journalist. I think he should be fighting more than ever for such independence. What that mechanism is to ensure that independence, I would suggest that they have a look. And I know everybody says, let's look at the BBC model and so on. But they're the ones who fought very, very strongly to keep BBC independent. Now, let's face facts. What we hear from the BBC and the World Service is really the BBC, the British government's propaganda arm abroad. And I say that quite clearly so that you understand. The British government pays for the BBC to run programming that reflects British society in the world community, etc. And in doing that, they end up covering developments all over the world and forging an independence that is missing in many, many places. How did they do that, you ask? Well, they start with separating the politics from the directing of the BBC operations, so that they look around for people who are non-political. They look for people in a broad swath of society and put them together, and they say, look, you are supposed to guard the BBC against political interference. 1. 2, you're supposed to ensure that the taxpayers' license fees that fund the BBC are spent properly. So this guardianship is really critical to setting up and establishing an entity that the public can trust. That is what we're talking about here. And I think that this is the minister and everybody else over there should really take the time to have a serious look at how they create this insulation, and recognize that it really doesn't make any sense for them to attempt, or anybody to attempt, to so-called control the state media. You own it in the interest of serving the public of Trinidad and Tobago. That should be the raison d'etre and nothing else.
But Julian, in all fairness, there is a perception that with this particular iteration of CNMG, there might have been interference. You had the very sudden resignation from Helen Drayton, and then you also had your sudden resignation, the sudden resignation of Helen Drayton from the board, and then a couple months later there was your sudden resignation. What accounted for that?
You know, I have I have hesitated to talk about certain aspects of that, but I think that one, Helen Drayton can speak for herself and has spoken for herself in terms of her dissatisfaction with the situation. Here was somebody who was very passionate, very dedicated, etc. In an environment where, for instance, there was no CEO. I think the CEO was let go, must have been October 2015. And so she really became an executive chairman. Somebody had to be in charge to make sure that the day-to-day operations made sense and so on. And I think, in all fairness to Helen, I think that her passion and her commitment was something that some people objected to. And I don't have to have water in my mouth about that. Other members of the board weren't happy. And they wrote a nasty letter to the minister, and she was offended. And I would have been offended too if people had, you know, had done that to me. And I think that was a very terrible thing to happen in terms of CNMG, because what it did was it demoralized the staff who were feeling, boy, I think we have a chance, you know, here's a strong person looking out for our interests, who, yes, she has our connections with the ruling party in terms of, you know, she can talk to the minister and she can talk to the prime minister and whatever else and so on. But we know that she will stand up and she will fight and whatever else. Now, with her departure, I mean, people who know Helen Drayton asked the question, well, why would Helen Drayton leave? And she said, look, I've been working my tail off. I'm tired. I've had enough and I can't take this anymore. All right. Enter Julian Rogers. I was asked whether I would assume the position of CEO. There was no CEO. All right. So there was a gap there. I didn't think too long about it. I have to admit, I consulted with you know, my family and so on, and I'll tell you why. Because I felt that I could do something in the position of CEO that I couldn't do when I was the consultant. All right, I'm not talking about giving orders and whatever else, but I could make things happen. And I know and I knew then that the staff really had a particular sense of faith in me as somebody, one, who knew the industry well. I knew the history of CNMG. I knew Trinidad and Tobago. I was committed to Trinidad and Tobago as a Caribbean person, as the case may be. I was not I wasn't looked on as a Bajan coming and taking over, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I may have some reservations about that, but the fact is that they felt that my entry in that position would have provided a fresh thrust, somebody who would be prepared to defend them, etc., and that I had credibility in the marketplace and so on. And so, yes, I took on I accepted. But I got into trouble on day one. Day one, the staff let me down. Because CNMG is such a public, almost like a whipping boy kind of thing, which may be a bad analogy. But the fact is that everything about CNMG's operations and existence and whatever else was or has been in the public domain. And I have to tell you that has been the most demoralizing thing for the staff at Maraval Road. In other words, every time somebody says something and it is not positive, they go through a traumatic time trying to deal with it. And I mean, and their families and friends and everybody else, as the case may be. Anyhow, so I accepted to take on the job as CEO. Got into trouble on day one because
you said you were let down. You were let down how?
Yeah, I'll explain. I had a meeting with the management team when you know it was announced that I would be taking over as acting CEO, and And so I said to them, look, before I have this meeting with the staff, why don't we go and have lunch and sit down and let's focus on what I should be saying and what. So we went and we had lunch. And they said to me, look, and one of the big problems with CNMG is that other media houses tend to be breaking the story about CNMG while CNMG says nothing. Okay, or come late to the party as the case may be. So they said, look, one of the things we need to ensure is that this story about your appointment and the approaches you will take is packaged by us. You know, in other words, we break the story kind of thing. Well, we came back. We assembled all in the big studio for my introduction, etc. And I talked about the value of the company and what I felt everybody should be addressing. Mostly, I said, and the quick summary was that whether the company was owned by SABCA or Massey or by the government, the same criteria for success exists. And as a media house, they needed to work at creating product that attracted a solid audience that would attract advertising, and therefore make the company successful so that they could make better contribution to the people's welfare, better salaries, more investment in content, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was my mandate. All right. So I took questions from the staff, and somebody said, but Mr. Rogers, a lot of things around here are not working. And you know that full well. You've been here long enough to know that we got problems in this area, and the next, you know, with our master control has a problem. It's very limping along. Our edit suites in the newsroom need upgrading, and so on. And they went through, go through the list of things. And I said, look, when CNMG was established in 2005, the decisions about equipment, hardware and software, sorry, were made at that time. Now, it was what, 10 years later? So that a lot of the hardware and the software, either the hardware had broken down, the software was out of date, and I'm talking about software in every sphere of the company, whether it's accounting software, software for the newsroom, etc. The journalists to work, the program people, the works. And the guy said to me, Mr. Rogers, what would that cost? And I said, well, I've been looking at this with our engineers and so on, and there really is a quotation of $10 million. He said to me, in what currency? And I said, US. Well, that was a story that went all around all the media houses immediately. Why? Because the staff in that meeting live tweeted a staff meeting. Can you imagine that? So they told all the world everything that I was saying right there, right there, right there. So as fast as I made comments, all this stuff was out there. And of course,
right now, Julian, I want you to stick a pin there, because to me, the whole business of human resource management, and the staff politics within the organization will be very important moving forward, because, well, as you know, the plan is to wind down the company, well, essentially let go staff and then allow staff to reapply, not just from CNMG, but from anywhere else in the media, and any other person really can apply to be rehired. What kind of organizational structure do you think is going to work to move the company forward?
Listen, you first have to have a mandate, Rhoda. You have to be clear what it is that you want to do. If you know what it is you want to do, then you are going to have to assess what the resources are required. and that is technical manpower, as the case may be. You talk about manpower specifically here. I'm not going to put a magic number on the number of people who should be hired for the new entity. That's a decision that has to be made based on what the job is. That is what. Huh?
When you were there, was there enough staff or too much staff at CNMG?
It is not a matter of too much staff. I think that the configuration of the staff was a problem in that, and let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The staff was made up of a number of people who were freelancers, but freelancers for long enough time that they were permanent in real terms. Now that's a problem. That really is a problem. And we supplemented that core of people with other people depending on what the requirements were. I think that when you look at what has evolved in television, and I hesitated to talk about these things because I know people are sensitive about staff numbers. But the reality is that software has taken over a lot of the functions in television. And if you make a transition to a modern television outfit, you don't have so many people hands-on in the process, for instance, of say a live show. The BBC and several other operators discovered that it was possible to create a control room with one person at it, and I'll explain what happens. A lot of the things you see, I used to say television is a team sport, but a lot of things have changed. If you watch Al Jazeera, BBC, and all these other people, etc., you'll see cameras. You don't see anybody operating them on the floor of the studio. Those things are now handled remotely. And it takes one operator to operate 3 cameras or 6 cameras, as opposed to having 6 different people on the floor moving each camera around. So your numbers are down. In the control room, etc., you would have somebody, for instance, who is putting these little comments that you see, descriptions, for instance, Rhoda Barrett, U Electra, and so on, what we call a lower third or descriptive, as the case may be. Don't want to get too technical, but there are a lot of things that happen there. So you got a sound man, for instance, in place. You got like 5 or 6 people in a control room. These days, those numbers have been reduced to 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about staffing up now, if, for instance, the government decided, look, we want to really put this thing on a proper footing, recognize that we're 10 years behind in the upgrade, and we want to think, then your numbers are going to be reduced. But I think that your numbers will increase in relation to the work, the partnership you make with the independent producers, as the case may be. That is really where you begin now to outsource a lot of work. And that work is based on your ability to pay people, that advertising support, etc. So I think if you make up your mind exactly what it is you want to do, then you can really address the numbers game and get it to a point where it makes a lot of sense, because government was paying for the salaries of the staff at CNMG. That really is what this subvention is about in real terms. A guarantee. Look, we send you a note and we say, look, over the next year, this is what our staff costs are going to be, and therefore the subvention we expect from government is going to be this number. So they need to really sit down and look at what is this entity going to do differently from what's happening right now, and what numbers are required to do this job and do it well.
And while you were there, what did you arrive at in terms of the formula for operating a station like that? Because that was one of the things you were hired to do as a consultant. So what did you arrive at?
Yeah, the numbers were in the region of about 100 really at one point. I think that we felt that the ultimate overtime would be to get down to about 75 people to run the operation.
75. 75,
Yes.
Jules? Right. And what sort of structure were you looking at? CEO and management? What kind of organizational structure?
The management team would not have changed dramatically. I think that the process of reduction had been taking place. There were lesser people in radio, for instance. I think that the radio complement is quite small. There are areas in which there could be some reduction, and there are areas in which there could also be some growth. For instance, engineering, when I was there, needed some people. We were relying on, for instance, what they call the people who would come in as young people for training, etc., and then absorbed into the system. Interns, etc., but they've got is more than an internship. The newsroom. I know a lot of people said that there were a lot of journalists in the room, etc., but I think that they needed to understand what the output would be. I mean, there was a shortage, for instance, of editors, of news editors on the weekend. I know that some people ended up working 7 days a week and things like that at some stage to be able to have the editorial control in place. But I think that the real challenge really revolves around deploying hardware and software that would make the job much easier. Cameramen, you can't, these days, for instance, you see a lot of journalists in the international arena go out with a camera themselves and they shoot certain things and so on because the cameras have become much smaller and handier and so on. And you save your top-notch cameramen for special projects and so on, that kind of thing. So, the reality is that you really need to overhaul your approach to production and presentation to be able to address those kinds of things.
Now, one of the things the minister said on Friday is that he believes that the revamping of CNMG and rebranding it, taking it back to TTT, is also going to open up job opportunities for producers. How? Because I know a lot of this is based on your plan, the plan that you would have put forward for the company. How exactly is that meant to work?
Yeah, I think I just want to say that it is not my plan, but it is our plan. And when I use the our, I'm not just including the people at CNMG and the team at CNMG, but I think in all fairness we need to give proper credit to the independent producers who came up finally with a formula that we all felt could work. All right, so that is an aspect that I want to make clear. In making that, I forgot the other aspect of the question you raised.
How is it going to work? This whole, because he's saying that the economy is contracted. There is less money to put towards.
Right.
But
okay.
Minister
Yes.
has said that.
Okay.
Right.
Jobs are work. I make the distinction that yes, there's an opportunity for more people who are not within CNMG, and I think that is the way I see it really and truly is that there are two things here. Originally, when a lot of television stations are set up in the Caribbean, the expectation was that the television station would produce everything that had to be put on the air, except for the programs that you bought overseas, as the case may be. Sorry. That is no longer the case, and that's no longer required. Really and truly, the content on the station now, I think that you need a concentration on the things that you're best at. For instance, news and current affairs. Okay, the news gathering, special event coverage, and so on. There is room, and we did start some in-house productions that we put on the air. X and Y was one of those. For instance, we demonstrated that we could produce a number of things. The whole transformation of the look of CNMG was done in-house. So there's the talent there to do that kind of thing. Even the changes to the site, those kinds of things, and so on. But I think that as you reduce your numbers on one hand, the output required really opens the door to creating work for, most importantly, the independent producers and technical people, etc. That's where I see the jobs coming. I don't see you adding more people to the payroll within the state-owned media. Not that way. You rationalize your numbers, that's for sure.
So then, the particular questions that are throwing themselves up now. How exactly will the multiple entities that make up state media, CNMG, GISL, government, how are those things meant to work, to function as this new TTT?
That is a number that is a question you should put to the minister.
Well, when our question is posed to the minister, he's a little bit cautious. He's a little bit coy about giving responses. But when you had conversations with stakeholders and with the then board about it, how were you all envisioning it to happen?
Well, you need to go back. You need to understand the history of this of this situation. And I must express my disappointment in what has happened, for instance, with JSL, and similarly with CNMG. All right, now this current minister is responsible for the establishment of JSL. He convinced people to leave the government information service to join a corporate entity that was JSL, and now within recent times, he is also what I want to say, presided over the demise of JSL. I think that's sad. I think that is a most terrible development in the context, particularly of the people who work in the JSL institution. JSL mandate, as I understand it, was to take advantage of the fact that the government was spending millions of dollars to tell its story to the public. Millions of dollars. So that JSL would have absorbed that money that would normally have gone to production houses across Trinidad and Tobago. And the bookings that would go for placement in the media would also to be the benefit of JSL. They would get commissions, etc. That model failed, or not failed, but was manipulated during the PP administration. And in fact, when I got there in 2015, 2016, I learned then that many media houses are owed, millions of dollars by GISL. Okay, and over time that was cleaned off and so on within I think while I was still there. But to see the crash of JSL, really, and the way in which it was handled, I think that it was a great disservice to those people who made a commitment to join JSL from JSD. We attempted to absorb some of those people, and then only to discover that their contracts would come to an end in a few months' time, etc. And that didn't work at all. I remember, a couple of those people, one lady in particular, being absolutely a real boost to the newsroom's output, etc. And there was nothing we could do because we were not in the position to hire. There was a freeze on hiring with CNMG, but we felt at that time that, hey, if the people had contracts at JSL, we could use their services and benefit from that situation. But it just didn't work out that way. So that history, I think you need to appreciate. And then you come to CNMG, yes, and there was a freeze on hiring. Now, I think that the minister has to have an answer for where this is going or where he expects it to go. I know he said that his hand is not in the pie, as the case may be, but he is the face of the government. in this context. And he must have some idea as to how he expects that this thing will proceed. I got a call from somebody saying to me, look, you know, this is a terrible situation with the news of CNMG. And I said, what else is happening? And they said, well, you know, the credit unions and the banks and so on are holding meetings and looking and trying to determine, look, the credit union saying, we're going to have to make a provision for loan delinquency because these people may not have any jobs, etc.
You're referring to who are facing the breadline.
Yeah, and the fact is that the timing of this is coming at a time when people are scrambling to get their children into school in September, this Christmas coming, etc. And I was thinking, I worked with Cable and Wireless for the Caribbean for some time, some years ago. And then one of the things that always struck me was that when Cable and Wireless had to reduce numbers, they were famous for how they handled it. One, you got a very big package. Two, they provided an opportunity for training or retraining. They also provided counseling, etc. So that a situation that would be very traumatic or is traumatic for most people would be cushioned in a number of ways by the company demonstrating that it did care about these people who were loyal members of staff, but who unfortunately in a restructuring exercise needed to be let go. And people left not the happiest in the world, but at least they felt, look, the company didn't just kick me out the door, but they provided some kind of buffer, some kind of facility that would allow me, one, to be able to see if I could be retrained to find another job somewhere else, somewhere in the country as the case may be, and that if my stress levels were significant, that I could call on somebody who was a professional to be able to deal with the situation as the case may be. And thirdly, most importantly, I had a little package in my hand. Some people have gone on to become independent operators and things like that and so on and so on. I am not aware of that kind of thing happening in either the JSL or the CNMG situation. And I think it is regrettable. And I have to say it, I can't hold it back. Because while I was there at CNMG, I always felt that this human resource matter was critical. You know, it was always a sense that one day coming soon, there would be an announcement that this enterprise would be shut down or sold to somebody. And while I'm on that, I think that I don't understand why it's taken this long to come to this decision. But we were given, you know, do you think? Huh?
Do you think that the decision being made now was the best timing for it?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Because this is a decision that was pending since before I became CEO. In other words, what are you going to do? What is there a continuing mandate for these entities? And that was the point of the national consultation, where the public was asked and stakeholder interests were asked, what do you expect of these entities? What should they be? Should they be here? Should we get rid of them? Whatever the case may be. And people, as far as I can go, I go back into the feedback that came from the public. All the public said is, look, do a better job. Do a great job. Make us happy. Satisfy our needs. Satisfy our interests. They didn't say shut it down. They said, good, you guys have a chance to really make a class outfit. Whether you are CNMG or JSL. JSL as an entity, the government has to invest in communicating its operations to the public of Trinidad and Tobago consistently, without fear, favor, bias, whatever the case may be. The government agencies that people must be fully aware of, all the government's transformation to E this and E the next thing, etc. People must be aware. People must be aware of what services are available for them in Trinidad or Tobago, as the case may be. And you know, if you understand that as a mandate, then you can't have a problem understanding what is required to deliver those things.
But Julian, one of the things that struck me is that this time of the year, certainly from around October, November, going all the way up to Carnival, up to the Carnival season, that's the best season for a media house to make money. So to be looking to shut down and to wind down a media house around this time and then to start it back up seemed counterproductive to me. And I wondered, I certainly queried the wisdom of the decision on the part of the minister as well as the sitting board.
Well, I have to make one reservation about that.
Uh-huh.
In the CNMG case, because I think people should understand what has happened here. CNMG was significantly damaged as a product by the previous administration. If you don't have credibility in the marketplace, your news program at 7 o'clock or whenever it is not going to attract the advertising that you expect. And that has been the case with CNMG for a very long period in this dispensation. So, two things here. Yes, you're right that there's a peak where you expect to get a lot of advertising, as the case may be. That did not happen in the same way with CNMG in the last period. I can say that unequivocally, that Christmas was not. In other words, what that would have been Christmas of 2015. Yeah, that was not a bumper period. Radio, yes, but not television.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The days where advertisers made $1 million commitments to a media house, those days are gone. You know, when I was at the Express, for instance, and TV6, Sheila Bulai could pick up the phone and call the TSTT's marketing manager and say, "Look, Julian Rogers wants to run breaking news every time breaking news hits. We need $1 million," and that agreement would come on the phone. These days, that's it. There's less money from the advertisers. There are more players in the marketplace. So more of the money gets spread around, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't have the ratings that CNMG did not have, because the last survey was done in 2014, and it showed that CNMG was not in the top, was in the top 3, as the case may be, and therefore people, you heard TV6 advertising over and over again. We're number 1 in the marketplace. We're number 1 in the marketplace, and they weren't anxious to have another survey that would show whether they were number 2 or number 3, as the case may be. So CNMG suffered greatly, suffered dramatically, and that I think is one of the concerns that I would have for this proposed transformation, because you'd literally be starting from scratch again. So instead of government subvention being 1.14 million, as the case may be, I envisage that it's going to cost them more money to support this new entity over a particular time, until there is sufficient audience. Remember, we're talking about having set up CNMG in 2005, TV in 2006. And this is 2017. And if you're so far behind the ball in terms of advertising, what will happen if you shut down and start all over again? You're really behind the 8th ball. So they better be prepared to face the fact that it's going to cost them more rather than less in the immediate term.
So then, is it even viable? I mean, because one of the things the minister said, I mean, the annual subvention is somewhere between $20 to $25 million, depending on how much.
The subvention. If you heard him, the subvention he quoted was 14 million. It used to be 16 million.
Right, but he had also given some figures that mentioned 23 million, 25 million, and they felt that they were going, the numbers were increasing, so of course then they went back down. Are we getting value for money?
Sorry, Rhoda. I'm at a disadvantage because I didn't hear all of the press conference.
Okay, that's all right. But well, let's work with the $16 million dollar subvention.
14. It's 14.
One, are we getting value for money with that subvention? And two, is any of what the minister is suggesting can take place moving forward? Is any of it, is it likely to actually bear fruit?
Again, I'm saying, if I'm not aware of what the plan is sufficiently to be able to pronounce on that. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
It is all I picked up right now is rather sketchy. I don't sense that confidence of a plan that says we will do this, and this. So there's no way that I could say to you that I just sketched out for you what the realities are. And the realities are that if you don't have audience, you don't attract advertising. If you don't have advertising, who is going to fund it? So immediately that subvention is going to go out. Now, you ask me about value for money. You have to ask yourself, and somewhere along the way, we have to agree that this investment is worth it. Instead of going, the term I'm hearing all the time and is being used in the media again and again is like people referring to Liat as cash strapped. When Liat stopped being cash strapped over a period of time, and then it's been a fluctuating situation, but they get tagged. CNMG has been tagged that it is a drain on the public purse. Now, it is a consistent drain on the public purse if the subvention was 16 million 1 year, and then Minister of Finance reduced it and it's come down to 14 million. All right. The question here is, does CNMG deliver to the public of Trinidad and Tobago a product and service that is worth $14 million in investment? That's it. That's all you ask. And I would say to you that the cable penetration in in Trinidad and Tobago is about just over 50%. It means then that the other 49 whatever people are watching television free to air. People in Tobago, I'm sure, are relying more on free to air than anything else, and there's a significant installation there that is maintained by CNMG. Sorry. So if you say that you expect CNMG, TTT, or whatever name we use, to do specific services for the public of Trinidad and Tobago, be there in national emergencies. Be there to tell you what your government is doing for you. Be there to cover elections. Be there to cover the budget. Be there to cover major sporting events. Be there to cover major cultural events. Be there to cover independence. Be there to cover Republic Day. Mind you, other stations relay the material from CNMG and don't pay a cent for it. Not one red cent. You get a phone call and say, you guys doing independence? Or whatever.
Is that the station's fault?
Huh?
Is that the station's fault or CNMG's fault that it is not finding ways to make that sort of broadcasting lucrative?
It is something developed over the years that the private sector entities have been allowed to relay the content of the state-owned enterprise. That's it. That's the history. Now, if it is that they can forge an understanding with the private sector people that all our content has a value, and therefore, if you want to relay this material, but you see, they go on the other side where the government saying, look, we need to have national coverage, and we have time on the private sector stations, etc., and we expect them to carry it as the case may be. But some decision has been made about things like that. So I come back to the value proposition here. The question I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago need to ask themselves is there value of $14 million a year in CNMG worth it to them in terms of providing them with entertainment, information, a reliable service in times of crisis, as the case may be, information about what's happening with the government and so on, information about what's happening in the rest of the Caribbean and what's happening in the rest of the world, because we can't be isolated in this context. And not everybody, for instance, can afford to pay for cable. So that, I think, is the big question. Now, I wish you would talk about the funding possibilities. Now, and I wouldn't even wait for your question. Huh?
Let's talk about it. Again, I'm going to refer to the minister here. He talked about, being able to get advertising. He also talked about, being able to package stuff and getting, and eventually, licensing the packages out. What are the funding possibilities, especially since the state is saying that its role here is going to be very limited?
Listen, when Helen Drayton's report went in, I felt that some of the ideas presented there would be useful to pursue. Now, I've spent, since you asked me yesterday about coming on and talking about this, I took a look at one possible source of funding to support this overall entity. And one such entity is the Telecoms Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, they operate to license the public property of frequencies, etc., to all the radio stations, TV stations, and the telecom people like, Flow, Digicel, etc. They're raking rota millions of dollars every year. They have a surplus. In 2014, that surplus was $55 million, which was thrown right back in the Treasury. I think last year, it was like 34, if I remember the correct. Yeah. Okay. Now, that's a surplus, huh? What does it take to run CNMG? In the region of $50 million. Okay. You're getting in the region. I think I heard the minister say that the advertising was coming at 30 million.
About that,
the subvention. 30 million from advertising. You've got another 14 in the let's say 14 million in the subvention. So you got 45. Let's say you got 45 million dollars. That, for one, has a surplus of 55. Why can't you earmark a portion of tax proceeds towards sustaining this public service that CNMG or TTT is providing? That's one. Two, you got the national lottery. Now, the national lotteries, as far as I know, in places like England and so on, particularly in England, they contribute to a number of areas of national development. Okay? A lot of money is not collected, and of course, the lottery makes a profit. There's no ifs and buts about that. Whatever surplus is returned to the Treasury. Now, there are instances where people have won the lottery and never collected the prize money. And you have a year. Sorry, if after a year it's not collected, it goes to the Treasury, and then the Treasury holds it for 3 more years before the minister, after that time, you can't come along and say, I won the lottery and I want to collect the money. Now, there are a number of instances where that prize money has never been collected. So if government would look at the funding or recognize that the funding of the state media is possible if they calculate that they can support it with the funds that are generated by 2 key institutions that they own. Now, and I'll tell you something else about TAT. I'm sure that when TAT's books come out for 2017, it should show a marked increase in that surplus. And I'll tell you why. the licenses for the telecom operators would have increased by virtue of these new services that they're available, that they're now doing. The subscription services, etc. Digiplay, Flow, Sports, etc. And I think there's a third license out there, etc. So they have been collecting a lot of money. They have a lot of money. And I know that that was one of the things that came up in Helen Drayton's report, that we should look in that direction. Because if you compare our situation with that of, say, the United Kingdom, they've had a long history of using license fees from households to support the work of the BBC. We can't introduce license fees anymore, because when it was introduced in the first place in many Caribbean territories, it was tied to the importation of TV sets and radios. No, nobody imports and buys any radio anymore. TVs you buy, but you sneak it in through the airport or whatever the case may be. You know, yeah, you go down the courts and courts may be responsible for things, but that's not a big volume to say that the license fee is a way of supporting this kind of enterprise. You have to have a more substantial set of money to make this thing work. And I think that if the government is serious about funding, that at a time when the same minister said that they don't know where funds are going to come from to do this and do the next thing, I think those are two avenues that should be explored.
All right, now, Jules, I want to wrap up in about the next 8 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask you this question, which I think would allow you, it's something that it might take a while to explain. If you had to be on the new board, so they're going to have a wind down board, this board has to resign, they have a wind down board, and then there's to be a new board that sets up or that charts the way forward for the new TTT. If you, and this is hypothetical, I'm not saying that you would be on it. If hypothetically you were on that new board, what are the key things that you would want to see going forward with a new TTT?
Clarify the mandate.
Let's say you are.
Clarify the mandate.
Go ahead.
Right, that's one.
Uh-huh.
Two, clarify the funding mechanism. Three, clarify the resources required to conduct that mandate. Four, they need to clearly ensure the insulation of the institution from direct political interference. Five, I would say that one of the main tasks would be to really develop the entity as a truly national broadcast or media entity. And I say broadcast, but you know, we have to bear in mind that the legacy media of radio and TV have now almost been superseded by what is available and possible online. And that is an area that requires specific work to ensure that it is used to its max. So the government's E this and E whatever the case may be is all part of that. Now, the other thing which I consider is very, very important is to finally create an air bridge between Trinidad and Tobago.
When you
we
say
don't need Watson Jefferson from Tobago to Trinidad to remind us that this is a twin island state. What has to happen, and we looked at it about establishing a bureau in Tobago to put it on a footing so that Tobago will be making a consistent contribution to the national debate in the first instance. We could have a news anchor in Scarborough and one, and that's just the start at how you get coverage across the entire landscape. What's happening in central Trinidad, what's happening in San Fernando, what's happening in Deep South, what's happening in Arima and parts east. So that this concentration on Port of Spain, this Port of Spain concentration has got to go to break the back of what we now see on television or hear on radio as the case may be. because we would now be truly reflecting the national landscape. That, I think, is worth the investment by the government in whatever entity it is. So I'm saying that you need to sit down and say, okay, what can this entity do? One, what can this entity do in partnership with a number of other entities within the government sphere? All the TT, film, and so on and so on. All those TTT companies, that's why I say, you know, I don't really have a problem with TTT, because it's already there as a brand, and put it together with all the other creative industry entities and let's work. And there's the work has started. There's a Dr. Niles over there who's been bringing all the interests together in an effort to establish a platform that makes sense for the creative industries of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm saying the things are there. The entities are there, but they cannot be separate. CNMG cannot be separate from TT and what the other entities are. There need to be a broad analysis of what is possible, what can be done, and the government then says, okay, we can afford to make this investment because it is worth it, and it is going to develop for us a whole slew of meeting our development agenda for Trinidad and Tobago, and this is why this is the reason why we're putting this money in, and stop this thing about this thing being a drain on the public purse. Because if you start looking at what is or who or what entities are draining the public purse, I can identify several state enterprises that consume far more, burn far more money than CNMG could ever burn in a lifetime of operation. But you see, so Rhoda, there can't be just a narrow focus on CNMG. There has to be a broader assessment of what all these entities mean to the development of the Republic. Where are we going as a country? Where are we going as a country within the Caribbean context? Where are we going within the world community? Those are the kinds of questions I think that the people who want to make decisions about it should sit down and say, okay, we got radio and television facilities, we got film facilities, we have training facilities, and here again is another thing. CNMG, TTT, or whatever the case may be, could be a training facility for specific aspects of media production and presentation. That is what the minister has to go to the Minister of Finance with and say, sir, this is our plan. This is what we want to develop, and this is why we need this kind of money to be able to do this thing properly. And we're going to do it properly. We don't want to have a third collapse of an entity that the government owns. It shouldn't happen. It should not happen. But if they're not prepared to do this kind of work, then forget about it. Shut it down, send everybody home, give everybody a nice package, as the case may be, and let's have pain and misery on the streets. But that's not what government is about. Government is about running an efficient country. Yes, making a commitment to provide an environment in which people get employment and are sustained and are educated and developed and so on. So I want to suggest that there be a real serious sit-down consultation, as the case may be. You ask yourself, what did the Farrell Commission do in this whole period of time as far as CNMG was concerned? I don't see that reflected in the statements made by the minister. He didn't come out and say, the Farrell Commission suggested we do so. He said, I had a meeting with some film producers who come to me and say, look, we think you should salvage CNMG, and we have a plan, which was devised in partnership with CNMG, and we think it can work. That's all he's been working on right now. That's the platform. That is why there's such uncertainty in the marketplace as regards the future of CNMG. That is not an acceptable situation. It's not acceptable for the people who are working there. It's not acceptable for the people who are at GISL, for instance, who are now without jobs. There are about 300 people in Trinidad and Tobago, media experts, who are without jobs today. It is an untenable situation. It is unacceptable. It's not good for the country. It's not good for the people. Because those 300 people are not the only ones affected. All their families are affected. All their friends are affected. because those friends have to go and look after them and comfort them and listen to their stories and their woes and whatever else. Those people have commitments which must be made. How can they, I mean, how do you think you can go to the bank tomorrow as a person who is employed and say to the bank manager, look, my loan with you, I don't know that I can pay after 2 months from now or another month from now. Those are real people situations that I think that have not been addressed. This is cruel. This is a cruel situation for people. And I know you're gonna say to me, oh, I'm a bad manager because I don't want to face up to the prospect of people being retrenched and whatever else. Yes, I'm a bad manager from that point of view because I have a heart, I have feelings. I have fired a man and cried like a baby in my office after I fired him. Yes, he was wrong. He did stupidness and whatever else. But the man I know had commitments. I've closed down radio stations. And I've gone and done it by myself and said to one of my friends in Trinidad, I don't want anybody else to be there but me. I want to enjoy the trauma for myself. I cannot I cannot do this to my staff. I made a point and I said, I will close this radio station, but I will make sure I find jobs for the people who will be displaced, whether within the company as a group or outside the company as the case may be. So I think that there's a gross insensitivity to the real plight of human beings in this context. And I'm saying, sorry, that this situation demands far deeper work. And people should not have had to wait nearly 2 years to find out that they're going to shut down CNMG and then restart TTT. This is so messy. I can't understand it, because to bring back a new entity, there's a cost involved, right? Nobody said, only Wendell Manwaring and the lady who make the TTT t-shirt have any brand entities around. You got to change all your stationery. You got to change all this, all these things. You got to change your online look. All that costs money. So the question is, do you need to do it that way? What is behind this desire to just shut it down and start all over again? Okay, you want to get rid of some people just because they don't like their face, you don't like the way they talk, whatever the case may be? There must be another way of doing it. You want to get rid of the board? You want to start with fresh people? What is it? What is it that has forced them to make this decision at this particular time? I'm saying the timing is bad. This handling is awful. And really and truly, I feel so sorry for the people who've committed. The people at CNMG or the people at JSL were committed to their jobs. They did work. They didn't, yes, in every organization, some people fought around, whatever the case may be. But overall, you know what? The excitement was in that organization when they did things well, like the Manning funeral, for instance. I mean, they were walking with pride. They were like peacocks. They felt good about themselves. They said, Mr. Rogers, we did it. They were patting each other because they planned and they were ready. They were ready a week before. Nobody from the board had to come along and tell them, oh, you need to do so. They had a plan. They were ready to execute. JSL was ready to execute. They had equipment. They're in position. They had the amalgam of technical skills and the presenters and whatever else. So I am saying that it is possible to do quality work with people who are committed, with the support of a board that understands what's required in terms of policy direction, etc., and stay out of the day-to-day management of the enterprise, as the case may be. Ask for your reports on a timely basis, right? Challenge things that you don't think are running well, as the case may be. Be available to give the management the kind of support that's required. And we come to the point of the appointment of boards, rather. Boards up and down this Caribbean, they put the wrong people in the boards. The wrong people all the time. People who don't have anything to give a manager in terms of support of an operation. All right? Yeah, you need a finance person. Yes, you need somebody who understands HR. Yes, you need, in the context of this, you need some engineering against me. Yes, you may need a media person. You know what you need? You need people who understand how to have a relationship with management and with people. One, you need people out in the community. You need a Helen Draper who could call up somebody at British American Tobacco and says, I need $1 million to do so. Clout in the marketplace is very valuable. Those are the kinds of things that I think that we need to come to terms with. Not about personalities. You know, somebody say, oh, I don't want to hear Julian Rogers on my radio station, as the case may be. That don't matter. What matters is that the nation of Trinidad and Tobago, or Barbados, or Jamaica, as the case may be, is on a significant development path that makes sense for most of the people. That's what we're talking about here. We're not just talking about a little CNMG thing or a TTT thing. And that is, you know, that is what is missing in this Caribbean. I have worked in Antigua and Barbuda, worked in Trinidad, worked in my native Barbados. I'm familiar with the goings-ons of the media fraternity in every country in this region, from Belize and Bahamas, Guyana, as the case may be. I've been involved in training and development, overhauling radio stations, revamping television operations, etc., managing at the highest level. I'm saying to you that what is required here is not moveling, not bad-talking people. What we really need is a serious sit down and say, what do we want from this state enterprise? What is it worth to us? What investment can we make? And most importantly, can it be profitable? So this thing about the minister talking about it is not to be profit driven, that's nonsense. It must be profit driven. It must work to have a surplus. It must work to reduce the dependence on the government subvention. It must then, having made a surplus, reinvest it in the development of its people and its facilities and its ability to deliver a product and service to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's it. Amen.
Julian, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you so much for agreeing to the interview and for, you know, making it no holds barred, letting us know precisely how you felt about it. And for folks who, you know, only just tuned into the live, we were just chatting with former CEO of Caribbean New Media Group, Julian Rogers, also a regional media boss, weighing in on with his thoughts and feelings about the transition CNMG back to TTT and the whole winding down and disbanding of one media entity to recreate and reform another media entity. So thank you very much for tuning in, and Julian, thank you very much for giving of your time.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. Thank you to my friends and my family in Trinidad and Tobago. We can do this.
All right. Have a great Sunday.